In this video, we discuss principles related to provident living, self-reliance, and the welfare system of the church.
Which has primacy as the moral ideal, charitable giving or provident living? Provident living refers to the practice of living wisely, preparing for the future, and being self-reliant. Rather than first focusing our thinking on what is commonly called welfare or caring for the poor, we should be always first thinking about how we can make our society full of self-reliant individuals. Aristotle said,
"Anyone can give, but to do this to the right person, to the right extent, at the right time, and with the right motive, and in the right way, that is not for everyone, nor is it easy."
Is the way we provide help to others really that important? Suppose I had great wealth and decided to give it all away to the poor. Would that be healthy for society, or would it cause any problems? Christ declared that the way it is done is important.
"And it is my purpose to provide for my saints, for all things are mine, but it must needs be done in mine own way."
Notice Christ explicitly states that all of this around us is His. We are only stewards of what is here. Notice also that His language doesn't say selfless giving, charitable giving, or donating to the poor. He emphasizes providing in the Lord's way. The church has a publication called Providing in the Lord's Way.
The leaders who read this guide should teach the principles and responsibilities to the leaders and members under their jurisdiction. They should encourage the members to fulfill their welfare responsibilities and suggest ways in which they can do so. They should encourage parents to teach welfare principles to their families.
What is the Lord's way of providing? What are these welfare principles?
The foundation of all welfare principles is found first in provident living. Welfare principles are the applications designed to move individuals towards self-reliance. President Spencer W. Kimball said,
"No true Latter-day Saint, while physically or emotionally able, will voluntarily shift the burden of his own or his family's well-being to someone else. So long as he can, under the inspiration of the Lord and with his own labors, he will supply himself and his family with the spiritual and temporal necessities of life." Elder Robert D. Hales said,
"Priesthood-based welfare principles are both temporal and spiritual. They are also eternal and apply in every circumstance. The first building block may be described as provident living. This means joyfully living within our means and preparing for the ups and downs of life so that we can be ready for the rainy day emergencies when they come into our lives."
The Church General Handbook describes these principles of provident living such as finance, education, health, spiritual, and caring for the poor. Notice that these 5 areas of provident living are much broader than only caring for the poor in a welfare sense that we are used to.
In understanding how to care for the poor in the Lord's way, we first must understand the Lord's stewards. Doctrine and Covenants 104:11 and 12 says,
"It is wisdom in me. Therefore a commandment I give unto you, that ye shall organize yourselves and appoint every man his stewardship, that every man may give an account unto me of the stewardship which is appointed unto him."
Elder Marion G. Romney said,
"Food for the hungry cannot come from empty shelves. Money to assist the needy cannot come from an empty purse. Support and understanding cannot come from the emotionally starved. Teaching cannot come from the unlearned. And most important of all, spiritual guidance cannot come from the spiritually weak."
Any means of caring for the poor, spiritually or physically, has to first come from someone's labor. Deposits have primacy before withdrawals. This means that provident living must have primacy over all else, including caring for the poor. President Brigham Young said,
"I collect means around me. The poor must have it, and I make them work and pay for it. That makes me wealthy, and I cannot help it."
President Brigham Young was not apologetic about his stewardship. Neither should we.
Brigham Young described some early lessons he learned about applying his stewardship to caring for the poor saints emigrating to Zion. He said,
Before we arrived in winter quarters, we held obligations and accounts against the poor saints we had emigrated to America to the amount of about $35,000, and that too out of our own individual pockets. It was not church money. But while we were in winter quarters, I do not think there could have been 10 persons counted, old and young, who were brought from England by our liberality. Is this fact encouraging or discouraging? The honest poor are still suffering. I mean the Lord's poor. But you may take the devil's poor and the poor devils, and they will plead 1,000 times harder to be brought out of England, to have their feet placed upon American soil, than the Lord's poor or the honest poor. The devil's poor and the poor devils will manage to get here, while very many of the Lord's poor stay there and suffer, and continue to suffer until they lay down their bodies and sleep in the tomb. Thousands and thousands of them will do this, while that portion who call so loudly for help are those who will come here and then go to the devil.
Brigham Young is teaching us the hard-earned lesson that it is a mistake to lump all poor into a single category and assume they are all the same.
Using President Brigham Young's terminology, the poor can be divided into two distinct categories, the Lord's poor and the devil's poor. Early church leaders learned to be more than willing to help the Lord's poor, but also learned to refuse to provide help in the same way to the devil's poor. So what is the separator between these two types of poor? The Lord's poor are those who are worthy, meaning personally righteous, willing to make and keep covenants. The devil's poor are those who are unworthy or personally unrighteous, not willing to make or keep covenants. We can further describe the Lord's poor and the devil's poor with two additional attributes. The major separator between the Lord's poor and the devil's poor is between those who are potentially willing to keep covenants, work, and provide for themselves, compared to those who are unwilling to do so. When it comes to actually providing in the Lord's way, the attribute of ability must be taken into account to differentiate those who are able to care for themselves compared to those who are unable to do so.
In the upper right quadrant, we have the industrious poor. These are they who are both willing to work and keep covenants, and who are also able to work to provide for their own needs. In the lower right quadrant, we have the unfortunate poor. These are they who are willing to work and keep covenants, but due to unfortunate circumstances are unable to provide for their own needs. In the upper left quadrant, we have the idle poor. These are they who are unwilling to keep covenants, work, or provide for themselves, even though they would be able to do so. In the lower left quadrant, we have the ruinous poor. These are the poor devils who are both unwilling to keep covenants and provide for themselves, and they are also unable to do so. All of these types of poor are where the principles of providing in the Lord's way are applicable. The Lord's stewards should be aware of these details and have the goal of moving everyone into the upper right quadrant of self-reliant, willing, and able. This goes back to Aristotle's statement from the beginning of this video, where he said it is easy to give, but hard to give in the right way. If we do it in the wrong way, it is destructive to the very individuals we are trying to help, as well as being destructive to our overall community. Supporting the idle in their idleness ruins those individuals and the community by setting them up for continual dependency instead of freedom and independence. Let's briefly go through each category.
First, we talk about the Lord's industrious poor, those who are willing and able to care for themselves. Elder Erastus Snow said,
"Those who are the Lord's poor always prefer to provide for their own necessities than to be dependent upon others."
President Brigham Young said,
The Lord's poor do not forget their covenants, while the devil's poor pay no regard to their promises. My experience has taught me, and it has become a principle with me, that it is never any benefit to give out and out to man or woman money, food, clothing, or anything else if they are able-bodied and can work and earn what they need when there is anything on the earth for them to do. This is my principle, and I try to act upon it. To pursue a contrary course would ruin any community in the world and make them idlers.
The way assistance is given is crucial in keeping those helped to remain independent. Otherwise, it is ruinous to the community because it sends individuals in the opposite direction, away from the healthy quadrants.
We never know what the future holds. Even with our best efforts and planning, at some point in our life, we ourselves could be hit with unforeseen troubles beyond our control, rendering us incapable of fully caring for ourselves. President Spencer W. Kimball described the primacy between the institutions potentially providing assistance in these situations. He said,
"The responsibility for each person's social, emotional, spiritual, physical, or economic well-being rests first upon himself, second upon his family, and third upon the church, if he is a faithful member thereof."
Providing in the Lord's way describes the responsibility of those receiving assistance.
There will be times in our lives when we will not be able to meet our needs without the help of others. The receiver accepts the offered help with gratitude. He uses it to release himself from the bondage and limitations of his need and become more able to rise to his full potential, both temporally and spiritually. He then reaches out to help others.
President Brigham Young said,
A certain portion of the human family have to be looked after and taken care of. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good.
Ronald Reagan described the purpose of welfare programs from a governmental perspective. His views on welfare seem to align well with Latter-day Saint teachings.
Welfare's purpose should be to eliminate as far as possible the need for its own existence.
Notice that all welfare principles should be designed to move individuals towards being willing and able to care for themselves. In the political realm, we should hold government officials accountable for how they use public taxes in implementing welfare principles.
Next, we talk about the devil's idol poor, those who are unwilling to provide for themselves but are actually able to do so if they wanted to. Elder Erastus Snow described a key difference between the Lord's poor and the devil's idol poor.
They who are able to provide for themselves, but would rather have others bear the burdens of life for them, are not the Lord's poor, they are the devil's poor.
In Doctrine and Covenants 43:42, the Lord himself describes his commandment regarding those idlers who are able but unwilling to work and provide for themselves.
Thou shalt not be idle, for he that is idle shall not eat the bread nor wear the garments of the laborer.
The commandment to not be idle would apply to the idle rich as well as the idle poor. The idle rich can also be ruinous to society. Elder Boyd K. Packer reaffirmed this principle of avoiding idleness.
When people are able but unwilling to take care of themselves, we are responsible to employ the dictum of the Lord, that the idler shall not eat the bread of the laborer.
President Brigham Young said,
Find them something to do that will enable them to sustain themselves, but don't relieve the idle. For relieving those who are able but unwilling to work is ruinous to any community.
To help illustrate what this idleness looks like, we are going to invite a shamelessly idle poor person to speak to us. Listen to Alfred Doolittle from My Fair Lady, who shamelessly describes himself as the undeserving poor.
Well, look at it my way. What am I? I asked you, what am I? I'm one of the undeserving poor, that's what I am. Now, think what that means to a man. It means he's up against middle-class morality for all the time. If there's anything going, and I puts in for a bit of it, it's always the same story. You're undeserving, so you can't have it. But my needs is as great as the most deserving widows that ever got money out of 6 different charities in 1 week for the death of the same husband. I don't need less than a deserving man, I need more. I don't eat less, Auntie, than he does, and I drink, a lot more. I'm playing straight with you. I ain't pretending to be deserving. No, I'm undeserving. And I mean to go on being undeserving. I like it, and that's the truth.
Lastly, as a cautionary tale, we talk about the ruinous poor devils. They are they who are both unwilling to provide for themselves and who have become so dependent on others for their support that they are also unable to care for themselves. President Kimball described this in his book, The Miracle of Forgiveness.
This is demonstrated in the story of the lark. Sitting in the high branches of a tree safe from harm, he saw a traveler walking through the forest carrying a mysterious little black box. The lark flew down and perched on the traveler's shoulder. "What do you have in the little black box?" he asked. "Worms," the traveler replied. "Are they for sale?" "Yes, and very cheaply too. The price is only 1 feather for a worm." The lark thought for a moment. "I must have 1,000,000 feathers. Surely I'll never miss one of them. Here is an opportunity to get a good dinner for no work at all." So he told the man he would buy one. He searched carefully under his wing for a tiny feather. He winced a bit as he pulled it out, but the size and quality of the worm made him quickly forget the pain. High up in the tree again, he began to sing as beautifully as before. The next day, he saw the same man, and once again he exchanged a feather for a worm. What a wonderful, effortless way to get dinner. Each day thereafter the lark surrendered a feather, and each loss seemed to hurt less and less. In the beginning he had many feathers, but as the days passed he found it more difficult to fly. Finally, after the loss of one of his primary feathers, he could no longer reach the top of the tree, let alone fly up into the sky. In fact, he could do no more than flutter a few feet in the air, and was forced to seek his food with the quarrelsome, bickering sparrows. The man with the worms came no more, for there were no feathers to pay for the meals. The lark no longer sang because he was so ashamed of his fallen state.
This is how unworthy habits possess us, first painfully, then more easily, until at last we find ourselves stripped of all that lets us sing and soar. This is how freedom is lost. This is how we become enmeshed in sin.
Everything we have discussed about the poor so far assumes there is ample time available for discernment. What about emergencies and natural disasters where there is no time for discernment? Natural disasters follow a different, short-term emergency model where everyone is helped to survive the temporary crisis. In emergencies like these, soup kitchens and temporary shelters take over all categories, regardless of willing or able status. This emergency model describes the parable of the Good Samaritan, where an obvious disaster has occurred, and there is no time for judging willing or able status. The Church Handbook differentiates between short-term versus long-term needs. In emergency situations, soup kitchens can be a lifesaver, but it is a big mistake to follow a crisis model long-term and administer crisis mode welfare under normal economic circumstances. Joseph Grenny said,
My principle for helping others is to always ask, how will my potential help influence their future behavior? This question is crucial because, if you really want to help, your goal should not just be to alleviate present suffering, but future suffering as well.
Giving assistance that introduces future dependency is contrary to providing in the Lord's way. Whenever we provide assistance, we should ask ourselves, is this something I am comfortable with in the long term, sustaining it over weeks, years, and eternally? If we provide assistance in a way that creates dependency, we have made things worse in the long run. President Kimball cautioned.
So often, secular leaders rush in to solve problems by seeking to stop the present pain, and thereby create even greater difficulty and pain later on.
President Brigham Young described his perspective in dealing with all the classifications of poor. He said,
Dare any of you come and buy property. I can furnish as much as you can buy. Walk up and buy my beautiful situation on the hill, and I will put the proceeds into the perpetual emigrating fund. If you will pay me the money and gather the saints, the Lord's poor and the devil's poor, and the poor devils, and when we have got them here, we will make saints of them if we can, and if we cannot, we will cast them out of the kingdom.
Early church leaders compared their community of Zion to a beehive called Deseret. They described the drones in the hive who don't collect pollen, don't make honey, don't defend the hive, and don't care for young bees. Drones essentially hang around the hive being fed by worker bees. President Brigham Young said,
But it seems that there are many drones in the hive who are determined to tie up the hands of those who rule the affairs of this kingdom, and the quicker they are thrown out, the better.
Elder Heber C. Kimball said,
May the Lord our God bless the bees in the hive of Deseret, and root out the drones, for they only eat out the honey, while the bees go out and gather it in.
Various church leaders have described the church's common sense perspective in dealing with all classifications of poor. President Brigham Young said,
My policy is to keep every man, woman, and child busily employed, that they may have no idle time for hatching mischief in the night and for making plans to accomplish their own ruin.
The church offers guidance on dealing with transients.
The bishop may assist members or others who are transients, but he should be discerning about the type and amount of assistance he gives. Teach members that transients, panhandlers, and the poor are best served by following the principle of the law of the fast and by paying a generous fast offering.
Instead of giving to panhandlers, which involves very little discernment on our part, it is best to give through fast offerings and let the bishop perform his calling in assisting the poor through discernment and accountability. Elder Erastus Snow said,
To continue to hand out your food and your substance to the beggar who comes to your doors without putting him in a position to help himself and to supply his own wants is to encourage him in folly and wickedness, and is throwing away the blessings of heaven which God has placed in your hands.
We cannot be self-reliant without being willing to work. Work is physical, mental, or spiritual effort. He never forsakes us, but he does not do for us what we can do for ourselves.
Notice a simple word, willing, is all that separates the Lord's poor from the devil's poor. The moment the idle poor and the ruinous poor change their attitude, they can start becoming the Lord's poor. That is when the Lord's stewards are willing to step in and help. The world in general does little to differentiate between the Lord's poor and the devil's poor. This is why the modern collective welfare state is so destructive to healthy society. Statism takes from the productive, the willing, and the able, and gives to everyone else, making no distinction between honest poor and dishonest poor. Politicians have turned state welfare into an economic issue between haves and have-mores in an effort to garner votes and political power. President Ezra Taft Benson summarized the difference in how the Lord works compared to how the world works. He said,
The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slums out of people, and then they take themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment. Christ changes men, who then change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. Yes, Christ changes men, and changed men can change the world.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to the Christian Eternalism YouTube channel and visit christianeternalism.org.